So let's start with our blessing before we dive into some Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzotav v'etzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah la'asok b'divrei Torah hafok ba la'asok b'divrei Torah yedadai dai 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 yedadai dai 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 yedadai dai 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 yedadai dai dai dai. So because we are in the middle of the holiday of Sukkot, our Torah reading this week is centered right there around this holiday. And next week, we will be diving straight into the beginning of our cycle once more, since we have Simchat Torah on Monday evening. So I thought for today, I'm actually not doing anything that comes directly out of the Torah portion for this Shabbat, which is in Exodus. Instead, I've picked different verses that relate to talking about the Lulav and the Etrogue. And that's what we're going to dive into today. I know I didn't send out the link to this Lulav and the Etrogue page beforehand. I actually did that on purpose because I didn't want any advanced reading. And I know how excited everyone gets about that advanced reading. So it is published now. So if you wanted to go to it on your own, you're welcome to do so. But I decided to keep this a little more of a secret for today. So I'd like to just begin with this portion from Leviticus. Does anyone want to read it in the English? Thank you, Jessica.
How much? How far should I read?
I muted myself, sorry. As much as you'd like.
Okay, well, I'll read to, okay. Mark, on the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered in the yield of your land, you shall observe the festival of the Lord to last 7 days, a complete rest on the first day and a complete rest on the 8th day. On the first day, you shall take the product of hadar trees, branches of palm trees, boughs of leafy trees, and willows of the brook, and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God 7 days. Okay, someone else can read.
You shall observe it as a festival of the Lord for 7 days in the year. You shall observe it in the 7th month as a law for all time, throughout the ages. You shall live in booths 7 days. All citizens in Israel shall live in booths, in order that future generations may know that I have made the Israeli people live in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God.
Okay, thank you so much, both of you, for reading this text for us. So we see a reference to our Lulav as well as our Etrogue. And today we're going to be diving into it. And hi, Don, who's on Facebook. Glad you can be here with us. I'm monitoring that too. So if you have anything that you'd like to add to the conversation, please feel free to either come in Zoom or to type something on Facebook, and I'll be sure to bring that in as well. But what we have going on in this text is this reference to the branches and to the product of hadar trees. And we don't yet know exactly what that is. We're going to get back to that, of the meaning of the product of hadar trees. Right now, I want to focus on the branches of palm leaves, the boughs of leafy trees, and the willows of the brook. What is this referring to?
The Lulav?
The Lulav, right? The Lulav that we shake within the sukkah itself. If we look, there are actually 3 times within our Tanakh where the Lulav is mentioned. And so I'm bringing in, well, yeah, one of them is a little outside of, but I'm bringing in all 3 of these references for us to look at to see the differences and similarities between them. We are only focusing on the Lulav right now. We're not focusing on the Etrogue at all. We will get to the Etrogue in a little bit, okay? So does anyone want to read this text?
I can read it.
Thank you so much, Brian.
They found written in the teachings that the Lord had commanded Moses that the Israelites must dwell in booths during the festival of the seventh month, and that they must announce and proclaim throughout all their towns and Jerusalem as follows. Go out to the mountains and bring leafy branches of olive trees, pine trees, myrtles, palms, and other leafy trees to make booths as it is written. So the people went out and brought them and made themselves booths on their roof, in their courtyard, in the courtyards of the house of God, in the square of the water gate, and in the square of the Ephraim gate. The whole community that returned from captivity made booths and dwelt in booths. The Israelites had not done so from the days of Joshua, son of Nun, to that day. And there was great rejoicing. There was very great rejoicing.
Thank you so much, Brian. So what is the context within this text for all of these leaves?
What do you mean? Could you ask?
What are they used for? Because it's talking here about bringing in these leafy branches. What are they being used for?
The top of the sukkot.
Construction,
Yeah,
generally.
put the roof on top.
Okay, it doesn't specifically mention the roof. It mentions the sukkah as a whole. It could be for the roof, but it could be for other components as well. Is that the same or is that different from what the text before it said?
Could we look at
Back
that
up to
again?
it.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's more specific than this, because this one says you shall live in 42, you shall live in booths. And in the one we just read, it says what those booths shall be made of.
Right.
More specific.
Yeah, so it's more specific as to what the booths are made of. If we look at verse 40 within this text, where it's talking about the things that are used, how does it say that these materials will be used? The branches.
Talks about rejoicing.
Yeah.
So the celebratory, waving them around. Is it sort of like a lifted offering?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't say a whole lot here,
No.
right?
No.
It talks about rejoicing. You're absolutely right that that's a huge, huge component here. There's something with rejoicing with them, but it doesn't say how we're using them. Whereas in the other text, in Nehemiah, it says that we're actually building the sukkah from them. Maybe there's other things that the sukkah is built from as well, but that these are things that the sukkah is actually built from. So it's 2 totally different contexts.
I think there's just a bit of I had a little confusion here myself that said, so the people went out and brought them and made themselves booths on their roofs. And I guess that means on the top of a house.
Yes. Because if you don't have other land to make it on, you make it on your roof.
In 15, it says, go and do this to make booths as it is written. Where was that written? Because it wasn't written in Leviticus to make booths.
Yeah, it's written in Leviticus to make booths.
Oh, did I
What's
miss
not
that?
written in Leviticus is what to make the booths from.
Oh,
Yeah.
So clearly there's different traditions that are being expressed here, right? And then there's one more text, and this actually comes, the book of Maccabees. So, you know, the book of Maccabees is tied with Hanukkah. And when the temple was destroyed, or the temple was desecrated rather, the Israelites finally came back into the temple after they were able to. And then this is what the text says right after they come back into the temple. Does anyone want to read these two verses?
I can read it.
Thanks, Jim.
And they celebrated the festival to the Lord for 8 days, like the festival of Sukkot. And they remembered the previous days when they celebrated of the festival of Sukkot in the mountains and in the caves. And they went out in the desolation wilderness like wild beasts. And they took the willows of the brook and the branches of palm trees, and sang a song of praise and thanksgiving to the Lord, who gave them courage and salvation to purify the temple of his holiness.
Thank you. So what is this text more reminiscent of, Nehemiah or the Leviticus?
Leviticus.
Do you want to say more?
No, the words sound the same. They don't say how to build anything. They say just gather them. They don't say what you can do with them.
Yeah, exactly. So like there was this tradition that perhaps these various species of produce could be used to actually construct the sukkah, but there seemed to be a more common tradition that was building around creating something that would be used to help us rejoice on the holiday of Sukkot. And this idea of what these things are used for isn't really clarified until we look at the Talmud. So the Talmud, as you know, is basically a group of, well, it starts with the Mishnah. So the Talmud, you'll see, I have a Talmud piece here, and it's separated into two sections, the Mishnah and the Gemara. Now, Mishnah is about 2nd century. It's the, they weren't called rabbis at this time, but they were the Jewish scholars. They were Tanaim or Amoraim was their name, who came up with various kind of teachings and ideas about the customs to help people live Jewish lives. And Gemara is rabbinic commentary based on the Mishnah. And that's what the Talmud is made up of. The Talmud is made up of the Mishnah plus the Gemara. So there is a section in here, and of course there's many other places in the Talmud that also talk about the Lulav and Etrogue. This is just one of them. And I'll read this because it's a little confusing reading it the way that it is here. So the Mishnah says, where in the recitation of Hallel would they wave the Lulav? So at this point, clearly there had been a tradition of waving a lulav, the first time that we hear that word in this kind of a way, waving a lulav during the service. Now, Hallel are blessings of praise. On Sukkot, we would say Hallel because it's a holiday where we are full of gratitude. It's one of our harvest holidays, right? So the scholars are asking, where within Hallel should we be waving this lulav? Where in a service should we be waving the lulav? They would do so at the verse, thank the eternal, for God is good. That appears at both the beginning and the end of the psalm, and at the verse, Adonai, please save us. So while doing certain psalms, that's where they're saying you should wave the lulav. This is the statement of Rabbi Hillel. Rabbi Shammai said they would wave the lulav even at the verse, eternal, grant us success. And Rabbi Akiva said, I was observing Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yoshua and saw that all the people were waving their lulavim, and the two of them waved their lulav only at Adonai, please save us, indicating that this was a halakha. So we don't necessarily need to go into all these specific verses and why they were waving the lulav there, but I'm just using it to point out that this clearly was the practice and that there were some different traditions around when you would wave it, but that everyone was waving it. So the Talmud goes on. Rabbi Yochanan said, he moves them to and fro to dedicate them to he whom the four directions are his. So it's referring to God, moving them to and fro. He raises and lowers them to he whom the heavens and the earth are his. So you know how when we have the Lulav and Etrogue, the practice today is to take the Lulav and Etrogue, to hold them together and to shake them in different directions. We shake them up, we shake them down. We shake them front to the side, to the back, to the west. We shake it completely around in a circle, so it's in all 6 directions. And this is giving some meaning as to why it's being waved in different directions. In the West, Eretz Yisrael, they taught as follows. Rabbi Chana bar Ukva said that Rabbi Yosef, son of Hanina, said, they do a lot of that, he moves them to and fro in order to request a halt to harmful winds, storms, and tempests that come from all directions. He raises and lowers them in order to halt harmful dews and rains that come from above. Rabbi Yosef ben Arvin said, and some say that it was Rabbi Yossi bar Zavila who said, that is to say, non-essential aspects of a mitzvah avert calamity as waving a non-essential aspect of the mitzvah. Since even if one failed to wave the loaves of the showbreads in the temple, he fulfills his obligation, and nevertheless it hurts harmful winds and dews. I'm going to go past that a little bit. And Rava said, and likewise, one should conduct himself the same way with the lulav. One should wave it to and fro and raise it and lower it for the same reasons. And Rabbi Acha bar Yaakov could move the lulav to and fro, he would say, this is an arrow in the eye of Satan. The Gemara notes that is not a proper manner of conduct, as it will induce Satan to come to incite him to sin. Gloating due to his victory over the evil inclination will lead Satan to redouble his efforts to corrupt him. Okay, so we have a lot of different conflicting ideas about why it is that we're waving the lulav and etrogue. There may be a lot of questions here because there are parts of this. Talmud is kind of challenging, and we don't have to go into every aspect of this, but I just want to kind of point out some of the meaning and even these smallest motions that we make with the lulav and etrogue.
This sounds, some of it sounds like superstition. You know, how
The
are we
last
going
part,
to, how to prevent the storms. If we do this, we'll prevent storms, we'll prevent too much rain. Things over which we have no control.
and that's the ultimate irony of the holiday of Sukkot, right? Sukkot is a holiday where we realize just how little is within our control. And so using the lulav in such a way to try to control that which is outside of our control is really fascinating.
You know, I would want to be respectful of each of these fellows, because they're all men, right? They're rabbis, of their sort of opinions and view of why these things are done. So that if someone does it to kind of the mystery of the weather and things over which you have no control, like in order to halt harmful dews and rains, okay, that's his perspective. And then the other people are suggesting that there might be these other reasons, you know, in order to deal with the eye of Satan or whatever. So I'm not ready to say any of them are right or wrong. It's just very nice. I think for my Jewish journey, I don't know that I was ever really knew why I was waving those. And I feel like I know something today better.
So why don't we underline, I don't think that anyone is saying that any of these rabbis are wrong. It's just fascinating because we're all human and we all bring in our own pieces to the way that we see things and the way that we do things, right? And we can see the humanity in what's going on here. So just to kind of underline some of the ideas that are brought forth, the first one is an idea that we're waving it kind of to acknowledge that God is all around. That really is the first one, right? That's idea number one. Idea number two is perhaps to halt harmful winds or harmful dews, to try to just ask God as a way of praying to God, please make this time that I'm in the sukkah as habitable and positive as it can be. I have to live in here for a week. God, have some mercy on me, please. Right? That's the second one. And the third one is very similar. And then there's this whole idea about Satan, about moving to and fro. This is an arrow in the eye of Satan.
I didn't think we made much of Satan. I mean, reading this, it sounds like Satan was conceived of as an actual being of some kind, a force.
Yeah, Satan comes up within Jewish literature in a lot of different places. So it's actually pretty fascinating how it comes up. It's not the same idea of Satan as in Christianity, obviously. But there is this kind of idea of this satanic force that, you know, could harm us in some way, and that perhaps we need to trick. It's part of the reason why when someone gets really sick, sometimes they'll change their name because they hope that in doing so, they'll confuse Satan or they'll confuse the angel of death.
Is this tied to the, what's that, the Yetzer Hara?
So that's a really, really interesting question.
Great question.
Yeah. I haven't seen places in which the two are linked, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not. I just can't think of places in which they're linked. The Yetzer Hara it gets a bad rap, the Yetzer Hara, right? Because it means like, it's used the word ra, which is negative, it's bad. But Yetzer Hara is the part of ourself that is ambitious, the part of ourself that could be self-centered. But we need the Yetzer Hara as well as the Yetzer HaTov. We need to have a balance of the two. Whereas Satan, there's not really too much redeeming there. But it would be interesting to look it up and see if there are ever correlations between the two.
How can a monotheistic religion admit another force, another, I don't want to say being, I don't know what the right word is, but something that's against God at God's level?
Satan is not at God's level.
Right.
It's not a Christian idea. Satan is not at God's level. Satan is undoubtedly subservient to God. I think this is a great Torah study. Maybe I should put together a bunch of texts. Actually, I think it's a lot more than one Torah study. I think it's a full course. There is so much there that could be really interesting to dive into how Satan appears in Jewish literature and what the meaning is underneath it, because it's super, super complicated.
And sometimes it's more prevalent than others also.
Yes, that is definitely true. Right.
So I think that this is, I think what we're not mentioning a lot is that this is always a harvest festival. So there's always that element of thanking God and being grateful to God and celebrating together. And I mean, at different times and in different places, the movement of the Lulav and the Etrogue is different. What I was noticing here is that some, but not all, of the kinds of branches mentioned are from trees that produce fruit or nuts that are used commonly in the diet. So there's that as well, you know. And yeah, I mean, how many religions, how many old traditions are there of celebrating with waving something or dancing, or when you wave and when you don't wave? There are a whole lot of people together to do this.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't do it that way, but there's a very integral part of the service, especially on the last day of Sukkot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Hoshana Rabbah, that we don't usually do within a Reform context, but certainly can have a lot of meaning. of waving the Lulav and Etrogue, and everyone having a chance to do that within the context of prayer. Yes, so I wanted to bring in this extra little piece relating to the Lulav just because I wasn't sure if people had some of this context of how the Lulav kind of appears at different times in our tradition. And I think that sometimes when we are shown one particular tradition all of our lives, or at whatever point in our life, we say, okay, that's how everyone does it. But we actually see such diversity within these texts of how it is that these different plants are utilized within the context of Sukkot. And that's pretty fascinating to have that diversity. And really the theme of this Torah study is on diversity, because I have some really out of the box stuff that I want to bring in specifically with regard to the Etrogue. And it goes back to this verse at the very, very beginning that we read, which came from the portion that Jessica read originally, that on the first day, you shall take the product of the Hadar trees, which is Peri Eitz Hadar, branches of palm trees, boughs of leafy trees, and willows of the brook. And you shall rejoice before the eternal your God for 7 days, right? That we didn't have the context of all of these things. But also, what is a Hadar tree?
Is it a beautiful tree?
So that's how it's
I just
sometimes
looked it up.
translated.
I just
Yeah.
looked it up. Splendor.
Splendor, but here's the thing. What is the splendor referring to? Is
The
it
fruit-
referring to the tree or is it referring to the fruit?
The fruit of a splendid tree.
Right, that's one way to translate it, but it's not the only way.
Ah,
And so if all you have is this phrase, Peri Eitz Hadar, either a splendid tree of fruit or a tree of splendid fruit, that leaves the door wide open for so many interpretations over what the fruit could be that we're actually using on Sukkot. And that's why there was a wide open door for what we will get to shortly. So I brought in just a few different texts that talk to this, right? The fruit of the tree Hadar, a tree, the wood of which Eitz has the same taste as its fruit. That's one interpretation. I don't even know what that means. I don't know if someone else does. The tree tastes the same as its fruit. I don't know what an example of that would be, but Rashi was convinced that's what it meant.
I think maybe we would ask a termite that question.
Maybe, I don't know. I'm
Or
not sure if
maybe
they can
they're
give us an
trees
answer.
that produce, what is it, spices.
Ah, okay. So moving in that kind of a direction.
That's the only time I can think you might want to eat the wood.
Yeah,
I mean, otherwise, usually you're looking for the fruit and you're not trying to eat the wood of the tree.
yeah. So perhaps it related to spices. Rashi then also said, it's called Hadar because it is the tree whose fruit remains on the tree from 1 year to another, meaning the tree remains for several years. And then he says, and this is the Etrogue. Now Rashi is much later on. The tradition of the Etrogue began years earlier. So we're going to be talking to how we actually got to the Etrogue. But he said it grows from 1 year to another. It's not a one-time blossom and then it doesn't blossom again.
Oh, no.
Chizkuni offers something else. Whoops, I'm getting too far ahead. Both the type of tree that produces fruit and from those which are pleasant to look at, which provide a pleasant fragrance. So it's a pleasant fruit. They are all to be tied together in one bunch. The moral lesson of this instruction is both the pious people and those less pious but generally observant are to join in carrying out God's will. So he's using this as a way of kind of bringing everyone all together. Now I'm going to go to some of the things that kind of talk to the history of the Etrogue itself. And this is based on a book that came out last year. Actually, I have it down here, by David Matzer, called Etrogue, How a Chinese Fruit Became a Jewish Symbol. And it's pretty interesting. So I included a big piece here from this article, which is basically a review of the book. And then I have a quote from the book itself. So does anyone want to read just this first paragraph here?
I can do it.
Thank you, Ray.
The etrog is indigenous not to the land of Israel, but to China, most commonly associated with mandarins, but a cradle for many citrus species. Several millennia ago, it grew most abundantly in Yunnan, a southwestern Chinese province, where it is still used to this day in traditional Chinese medicine. The most common variety is called Buddha's hand because it has spiny fingers like extensions. It looks kind of like a sea anemone. From there, it traveled to northeastern India and westward across the subcontinent, where it is now called the Bijapura, meaning seed-filled, and conjuring the image of something that is semen-filled. Matulunga, or Jambahila, and became a component of traditional Ayurvedic medicines used to treat everything from stomach complaints to hemorrhoids to infertility. One of the Buddhist gods, Jambhala, recall the etrog was sometimes called Jambhila, was often depicted holding an etrog as a symbol of fertility because of its high density of seeds. One is reminded of the medieval Ashkenazi custom for a pregnant woman to bite off the tip of the etrog at the end of a holiday. When Darius the First conquered India in 518 BCE, the fruit spread to Persia. Now it was called wandering, which seems to be the linguistic precursor to the Aramaic word etrog.
Okay, so there's a lot of history there so far. Thank you so much, Ray. I know there were a lot of words thrown in there that I don't know how to pronounce either, because they're Chinese. But I think that having them there to be able to kind of look at, to visualize some of the ways in which the Buddhist god's name and the name of the fruit connect is important. It kind of sets the stage for what's about to happen. So we continue, but why would Jews have decided that when the Torah commanded them to bring the Peri Eitz Hadar on the 15th day of the 7th month, it meant the etrog, a fruit that was unknown to the land of Israel before the Persians? Master explains that as Jewish practice became increasingly legalistic and textual, which is to say, as Jews began to look in scripture for more concrete rules about ritual, texts like Leviticus 23:40 and the ambiguous phrase like Peri Eitz Hadar suddenly cried out for halakhic definition and explanation. Some ancient sources, including less canonical Aramaic translations of the Bible, Targum Sudei Jonathan and Neaphiti, and a rabbi quoted in the Jerusalem Talmud, interpreted this phrase as simply fruit from beautiful trees, which is exactly what you found when you were looking it up, Bonnie. But by the end of the Second Temple period, the much more specific identification of Peri Eitz Hadar as etrog, found in Josephus and Targum Onkelos, the most widely accepted Aramaic translation of the Bible, and the Mishnah, won out. Master argues that the etrog was chosen as the beautiful fruit precisely because it was exotic, the prize of the Ramat Rachel paradise. So basically what it's talking about is in Jerusalem, they would have these special like botanic areas that they would create where they would plant beautiful fruit from different places. And the etrog became one of those. he talks about. One of the things that was planted and that was seen as this beautiful exotic fruit. So that's what he's talking about with that. Unusual in color and smell, used in medicines and rarely consumed because, well, between the thick rind and the copious seeds, there simply wasn't much fruit to be had. The etrogue was a good candidate for the role of beautiful fruit. The etrogue was strange in other ways too. The tree blossoms year-round, is covered in thorns, and perhaps more significantly, in Israel, it cannot grow without a great deal of artificial irrigation. In a year of inadequate rainfall, there would be no etrogues. This may have made it both a symbol of water and a talisman thought capable of calling down rain, a powerful tie-in to the fall harvest festival. Are there any questions or thoughts on this? I thought it was fascinating when I was reading about it.
This may be a bit of a bird walk, but earlier on when we were reading about the Buddha's hand, I recall that at our Shabbat during Sukkot, there was often a welcome dinner for new members, and the centerpieces were these Buddha hands that, and then of course other squashes, things and flower, and they were always quite interesting. I never knew whose yard they came from, but somebody had a yard that they were produced, and I didn't think anything about it until just now, except for that they're very unusual looking, and I heard the term Buddha's hand, and then I think about it now as I'm learning about this and how appropriate they were.
Yeah, extremely appropriate for this holiday.
I was thinking about it, but it was out of historical context, is that when Jews were limited to very, very few things that we could do, is that we did a lot of international travel. So, but I was thinking that might have been when this started, but obviously it was much earlier and before we did that much traveling on our own.
Yeah, this was very, very early on.
Do we still use that as one of the branches?
The etrogue?
Yeah.
So it's not one of the branches, it's the fruit that kind of looks like a lemon.
Okay, gotcha.
Like a larger lemon, that's what the etrogue is. And yeah, we use it today, and all throughout Israel, they plant them. Some people plant them I know there's a couple of people who plant them even locally, have like an etrogue tree. But yeah, it's the tradition now for most people. There's many different traditions in different places, of course, but for most people, the tradition is to use the etrogue, coming back from this 2,000-year-old tradition of taking this Chinese fruit and incorporating it very much into one of our most important holiday celebrations. Just shows how interrelated all of us truly are. So I want to include this last piece. Some of it is a little redundant, but the way that he brings it together at the end, I find to be fascinating. So I just want to bring it in. Does anyone want to read this last text?
I'll help out.
Thanks, Marla.
I do not know why the etrog was the first citrus fruit to make its way westward from Southeast Asia. Perhaps its anatomy had something to do with it. The etrog has an abnormal abundance of rind, which means it dries out instead of rotting or spoiling like other citrus fruits. This may have allowed its seeds to travel in a safe, fragrant container for hundreds of miles before being replanted. The etrog's swiftness is not the only way in which it was lucky. It was by no means predetermined that the etrog was to become the Peri Es Hadar of Leviticus 23:40. These three ambiguous Hebrew words allow for an abundance of other identifications, including palm fronds, cedar cones, tree trimmings, olive branches, regular fruit, and myrtle branches. Yet, Despite the many possible interpretations, the Etrogue won out and has come to be cherished in antiquity and today as the most beautiful and important Jewish fruit. Perhaps in the 21st century in which we live, with its globalism, mass migrations, and melting pot ethos, the fruit should be conceived of as beautiful, Hadar, for the successful journey it has made. In many ways, there is nothing more beautiful than a migrant who has been able to leave behind the pressures of his or her youth to find a new homeland in which he or she is loved, honored, and esteemed.
Wow.
Oh my.
Ooh.
Wow.
So what do you make of that?
What's a beautiful thing to think about as we're becoming so multicultural, as we're coming people moving around the world, as we're coming closer and closer, especially during these pandemic times, when we're having to share the knowledge of how to make vaccines to help people all around the world. It's a beautiful idea that this is something that brings us all together, the knowledge that's shared by everyone.
I think that nothing more beautiful than a migrant who has been able to leave behind the pressures and find a new homeland also reminds us as how many of us are migrants and how migrancy is a part of our history. Repeated, repeated, repeated.
That could also be a metaphor for growing up. We
Mhm.
are all migrants in life. We migrate from our youth to our old age. I don't have anybody
Unfortunately true.
particular in mind when I said that. You know, to find a new homeland in which we are loved, honored, and esteemed by presumably our grateful children.
Yeah.
Should we be so lucky to have had grateful children, which I was.
We also migrate within the United States. Many of us came from the east to the west, to the south, to the north. It's a wonderful thought. But the knowledge also is shared.
Yeah, I know. I was having a conversation the other day with someone in our community who grew up in another faith, who has roots in other countries, and who's trying to figure out, how do I bring my Norwegian heritage into my Judaism? And I think a lot of us grapple with that in one way or another, right? We have such a diverse community. We have families that are diverse in lots of different ways. And figuring out, how do we bring multiple cultures together in a meaningful way, because they're all parts of who we are, is really, really powerful. And so for me, learning about the Etrogue, this quintessential Jewish symbol of beauty and gratitude and celebration, and learning that it too is kind of a coming together of different traditions, I think is really profound and is a great statement for what it means to be a Jew.
Yes.
I agree. I was thinking that last sentence that we read, what if that were the headline in the newspaper instead of what the current headlines are regarding the migrants coming to the United States? Oh my gosh, what an opportunity for us to practice the values, not just of being Jewish, but the real American values. You know, Lazarus's poem on the Statue of Liberty, the values. Instead, the headlines are very, very different regarding this topic. What a shame.
But I also think, again, of sharing knowledge, sharing vaccines. There's a tremendous reluctance to teach other people how to make the vaccines. But it's in our best interest to do that. So sharing is important, whether they're migrating or not. It's knowledge has to help everyone.
So you're talking about the globalization of everything.
Yes, especially in health, education. But right now it's in health.
I think
Yeah, sorry,
I-
go ahead.
I think that last sentence also invites us to celebrate diversity. You know, we all come from someplace else. There are other influences all over the place, and say, I'm better and you're worse. That's, for me, that is just wrong.
Mhm.
But that's, I was also brought up that way, you know, but it's like to appreciate what it takes to leave your homeland
Oh, yeah.
and know you're never going to return. And that is many of our migrants. And many of our own families.
Well, that's happening now, where I don't know when I'm going to go back east to see my cousins. I mean, used to go back every summer. And now I'm still hesitant to fly. So it's different than a migrant coming from Ethiopia who may never go back, but we have it within our own country.
But Bonnie, you know what? I think what you're saying is really important. It's serious decision making, whether it's you feeling a question of your health and safety flying, or a Haitian deciding to leave his or her homeland given the horrific circumstances and coming to try and enter the United States to escape that horrible stuff that's going on and live a better life. It's a major decision, just like it's a major decision for you to go or to stay. I think it's our obligation to be respectful of both those peoples and to do what we can, you know, so someday you can make a decision that you feel comfortable with, or for these Haitian people to be able to have better lives.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
People trying to get out of Afghanistan.
Oh, I can't imagine.
I think Sukkot is here as a reminder of just how fragile we are and how life is, right? And to help us to recognize ways in which we perhaps have privilege that in some parts of the country people don't have. I think all of us have gotten far more in touch with the vulnerability over the past year and a half, and we're still feeling it in really like tangible ways all the time. Bonnie, your example is a really good one for that, right? But in general, this holiday kind of pushes us. 2 years ago when we did Sukkot, you might remember that the program that we did for that Friday night service is I invited 3 different people who were homeless at one point to talk about their experiences. Because on Sukkot, when we're invited to live in a sukkah, we realize just how scary that is, and of our role as human beings in trying to do our part to create more
Lost you.
for those who don't have it at all. Migrant is for someone to give up everything that they know, to put everything on the line, and to leave the only country they know, not knowing what will happen, what they will meet along the way, all of that. That is the scary, like I can't even imagine how scary that is. And so like, I think Sukkot can give us that little push to really think about that and to try to consider, what can we do? We don't like what's in the news necessarily, right? So what, if anything, can we do in order to help?
Where are all those people under a bridge trying to come from Mexico? I think it's Texas.
Right.
And I just had this vision of having sukkahs, how do you, multiples of sukkahs built all along that bridge so they would have some shelter. But I don't know what we can do from here.
Yeah. But maybe it's an opportunity for us to think a little bit about that and see if there are things that we can do. Maybe we can't do anything specifically for that group of people, but maybe there are other things that can be done.
You can always be vocal and just let your local representatives know that you care about the issue and want people treated humanely.
Yeah.
As a person who knows lots of people that work for state representatives or other people on their campaigns, you would think that a phone call from a handful of people wouldn't mean very much to them, but it does, because they assume that means you're extremely motivated, and they assume that means that you're advocating for other people. And so, yeah, it does make a difference.
That's good to know. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. That's a wonderful thing to do as part of like a Sukkot project, right? And just in general, good activism for our fellow human beings.
I will say that I have called many times in the last 6 months, local representatives, and clearly you're not speaking to the council person or the senator or whatever, but their staff are they're very polite and very appreciative, and it's a wonderful feeling knowing that you've done that, because like Brian said, it does matter.
Yeah, I think it makes me think a lot of that Jewish quote, which I am trying to pull up desperately right now. 1 second. It's the one from
Pirkei Avot.
You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to desist from it. So maybe we aren't going to solve things, but it doesn't mean that we have no obligation to do our part.
Beautiful. Yeah, that quote from Rabbi Tarfon is one of my favorites. I think it's something that a lot of us resonate with. Thank you, Brian.
No problem.
So this Torah study really is meant to be a little bit out of the box. And I wish that we could just all be in the sukkah right now, where we could be shaking a lulav and etrog to kind of bring all of this together, because those are our symbols. And when we do come to the temple, which you're welcome to do, whether it be Friday night or another time, we put forward different times that people can come and go to the temple this week. Or if you have a sukkah of your own where you can shake the lulav and etrog, I hope that as you do, when you shake the lulav, you can think about the metaphor that works for you. When you shake that lulav, are you thinking about how God is all around you? Are you asking God for a little bit of mercy in this world from the winds, however we interpret them? Or are you coming up with another interpretation that's all your own of what that means? Because we can do that. That's okay. When we look at the etrog and we now take it in knowing that it was a symbol that came from China years ago and that became such an important part of our tradition, can we also make a commitment to embrace the diversity within our community and the ways in which we can bring multiple identities together, and include that in our Sukkot celebration, while also thinking about just the vulnerability that is felt by so many and what we as individuals can do to live up to that quote that Brian brought in for us of doing our part, even if we can't do all of it alone. So Marla, I see you looking around. I don't know if they have anything for Sukkot in the book, I realized.
Yeah, I looked and no, they don't. But I feel like today's learning was a blessing in and of itself, at least for myself, what I'm taking away from it.
I want to also let everyone know that starting next week, because we're going to be starting a new, Torah learning with the first Torah portion with Bereshit next week, we're going to be doing something different this year. So about a year ago, maybe a year and a half, there was a new Torah commentary that was put out based on Musar, the Musar Torah commentary that Barry Block put together. There we go. We have our Vanna White over there showing us the book, and it has such beautiful teachings. So starting next week, we're actually going to use that as the basis for our conversations and Torah study, going through it. And I'm going to take little snippets out here and there. I invite you to read it beforehand, or if you don't have time to do that, that's okay. We'll walk through it and we'll be able to just kind of discuss it as a group. If you don't have the book yet, it's available just about everywhere. It also is like a Kindle book and a Google book and stuff like that. I think
What's
the temple
it
also
called
has a
again?
couple.
Sorry.
The Musar Torah commentary.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and basically what it has is each Torah portion is just a few pages, the commentary that they give. They're not super long, and they focus on one attribute. So we'll talk more about Musar and exactly what that is next week. Bonnie, your expertise here is very much appreciated because you know so much
appreciate it.
more than I do.
There's also video of each of the authors who wrote on a particular midah that went with the Torah portion of the week, and that's available online too. Yeah, I've gone through a whole year with each of them, commenting on what they wrote, and no, it's just I just finished it this morning with my Ruta partner, and
Oh, that's cool.
yeah, so I'm ready to go through the book again.
Awesome. Well, that's wonderful. We
Yeah,
look
thank
forward to
you.
doing that with you. So
Thank
I
you.
think that that'll be a really fun journey for all of us to kind of go on. So thank you so much for humoring me with this little bit of a different Torah study today.
Thank
And I
you.
look forward to starting the new year with all of you next week.
Thank you, Rabbi. That was
Thank you.
great.
Very thought-provoking. Thank you.
Rabbi, I also want to ask, you say that you send these out ahead of time. Where can you view those?
I'm sorry, say that again?
You say that you send out like the stuff that we read during the lessons ahead of time.
Yeah,
Where do you view those?
I do it by email. Are you not getting those?
No, I get the ones where it tells me everything that's happening in the week, but I don't get those emails.
Oh, you know what? I thought I had added you. Maybe I made a mistake in typing in your email address. If you text it to me right now, or if you put it in the chat or whatever, just to remind me, I'll make sure that you're added to that. I apologize.
Oh, it's no problem. Thank you for your help.
And Rabbi, if you know anyone who would like to visit a sukkah, I've had a cancellation for one of my guests tonight that I could include somebody else.
That's such a beautiful offer. I can't think of anyone off the top of my head.
Okay. Well, if you do, let me know. Okay?
Yeah, that's
All right.
lovely.
Okay. Many blessings. Thank you.
You too.
Okay.
Bye, everyone. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
And thank you again.